for coming. My name is John Callaway. I've been doing professional development since 1999, mostly web development. Started with classic ASP, VB6. Done a little bit of PHP, done some Java. I've been primarily a .NET developer for the last 8 or 10 years or so. So I've got quite a bit of experience in a number of different languages, little different practices and things, but kind of all of this translates, and what we're all looking for is to become better developers. So who is familiar with dependency injection? We use this dependency injection regularly. Who has no idea, and they're here to learn about it? Great, fantastic. All right, so of course there's a wiki definition out there that not telling who put that out there, but this is pretty good. Software engineering dependency injection is a software design pattern that implements inversion of control for resolving dependencies. A dependency is an object that can be used. The service of injection is passing of a dependency to a dependent object or a client that would use it. So, does that make any sense to anybody whatsoever? All right, so those people that have used dependency injection, what are you primarily using dependency injection for? What do you find it useful? That you raised your hand?
Strictly when using dependency injection as opposed to other IFCs. A lot of times, instead of knowing exactly what type of customer, passing the customer's invoice as a parameter, instruction injection is my primary use strictly.
Okay. Anybody else?
I use them sometimes in my applying for database connection.
Okay. Anybody else? Any thoughts on?
I use it in my portable class library to talk to my individual platform.
Okay. Yeah. That's interesting. All right. So Martin Fowler has another few words to say. The basic idea of the dependency injection is to have a separate object and assembler that populates a field in the target class with an appropriate implementation for the finder interface. So essentially what we're looking for is to kind of decouple those relationships and to be able to substitute in different classes when we need. So with that, we're going to look at some code. So I cranked up resolution and using the light theme. Hopefully everybody can see that in the back. Okay. All right, so with our first example here, what we're looking at is just essentially just a file, new web project. It's an MVC application. Everybody familiar enough with MVC that we can kind of gloss over the details there? Anybody not? So essentially this is just straight out of the box, no changes whatsoever, file, new project, MVC application. We'll just go ahead and push play and watch it run after it compiles and it loads. All right, so this is our nice generic bootstrap layout design with our standard MVC application. Nothing fancy, but out of the box we get the home page, the about page, and just a generic contact page. So of course, most of this is going to be in our controller, which will load up the different, which will route to our different views to load up with our different information in our view tags. So that's pretty much where a lot of us would start with a new out-of-the-box MVC application.
Okay, font size rule.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No problem.
Old man eyes. Order some 2 meters ahead.
See, no problem.
Hey, happy hour till 7. Meeting time's perfect.
You're supposed to bring enough to share with the rest of the class. So
That's pretty matter.
is that better?
2 more slides.
2 more?
Oh, that's awesome. You're the machine. Which is risks.
So next on the list, we have a different layered architecture. Maybe we're looking at some services or something like that. Something to interact with, maybe a database or something else to collect some information to deliver back through our controller and back to our view page. So what we start with is just a sample service. And everything's just stuck in our web application for now to simplify things. So what we're kind of pretending here for purposes of our demo is that this sample service maybe has a little bit of business logic in it. Maybe it interacts with the database behind the scenes. But essentially what we're saying is we want to get our message to display to the user in the view pages by retrieving the message from the service. So we'll call into the service and return just generic messages back to our controllers based on the page. For our purposes here, we're just going to new up the service anytime we need it, and depending on whichever route they're hitting, we'll call the service to get a different message depending on the page. So if you see here, our ASP.NET page, our main home page is calling into our service get message and passing it in just an ID of 1 to get the first message, which is ASP.NET. Displaying that in our view page by putting it in the view bag, clicking on the right thing, and then displaying our view bag message here in our email. So that's here. Same thing for our about page. Some of those. Sorry, I was fighting my machine all last night trying to get some of these working. So there we go. So same thing for our about page. We've got our for our about page, we're showing your application description page here is this message, and then on our contact page, the same thing for your contact page. So does anybody have any issues with just newing up a service anytime you need it? Anybody see any problems with doing that in our controllers?
Internationalization, localization would be an issue since that's German tax.
Yeah, that could be an issue. But more along the lines of just newing up our sample service. You know, what if we had a business case that we wanted to use a different service, depending on a different runtime or something like that, or a different environment, or maybe an internationalization thing we can call it in.
English service, different service.
Yeah, something like that.
Or even testing.
Testing, that's a perfect example. So this makes it almost impossible to test the action of this particular controller because we're newing up the concrete object right here in as well. We're also newing it up in every single action of this controller. So then, we kind of continue working, we gain a little bit more knowledge, we hear about some different practices, some different coding styles, some different opportunities to utilize some of these concrete classes a little bit differently. So we have just a field level service that we're going to new up in the constructor of the home controller itself. So every time the home controller is instantiated, a new instance of the sample service is created and can be utilized by the different actions for the pages that are delivered there. We run that and we can see that it's still going to work as expected. We're still going to call into our sample service, hasn't really changed. We're still calling in get message, passing in a different ID to get a different message for the different pages. And we're still delivering different information to each page. Now, is this a little bit better? Does anybody have any issues with this? You know, it doesn't really alleviate a lot of the testability. So we're still going to have some issues testing that because we're still newing up the concrete implementation within the constructor of the home controller. We're still going to have the same internationalization issues. We're still not going to be able to pass in a different concrete implementation of the sample service.
It's reduced code duplication.
It has reduced some of the code duplication. So we're getting there. We're making slow strides. We're making a little bit more progress, and it's a little bit cleaner, a little bit more straightforward. You know, but I think we can probably do better. I'm sorry? Yeah. Yeah. Then when you call the home controller, you're going to have to new up the object, new up the service, and push in your own implementation. But that's actually kind of along the lines of what happens behind the scenes for our dependency injection. So next up, maybe you hear about what Martin Fowler called poor man's dependency injection. So now we've got our same iSample service. We've got our same sample service. We've got a default constructor that takes no parameters, and if no parameters are passed in, then it'll create a new sample service for us and call our constructor with the iSample service implementation for us. And we did not see our services here. So our service now has an interface. So we're starting to deal with, a new code type, a new class type, a new file type that we're passing in an interface, so that we can. The controller now will accept any class that implements our iSample service interface. So maybe we can have a French sample service, or a holiday message sample service that for the holidays we want to pass in a different concrete implementation that would have different holiday specific messages. The problem is here that we would have to either new up our service, pass that in when we're calling the home controller, or if we don't pass it in, we're just going to get the default sample service. So we're getting there. We've got a little bit of flexibility in there. This is a little bit easier to test because we do have the option to pass in our own implementation of the sample service. We can mock it up. We can test our internationalization implementation of our sample service. So we're getting there, but this is still kind of a little odd to look at. If you're putting this down in front of somebody that maybe it's new to coding or new to .NET, maybe this is going to kind of throw them for a loop. So this is a little bit odd, a little bizarre. So I think we can probably do better. Does anybody have any other questions, any thoughts?
Yeah, actually, how would you instantiate that without an IOC? How would you inject anything different with that home controller?
You'd probably have to go into something to intercept any of the calls and then move it up and then pass it in that way. But if you're just calling the regular home controller, you're going to get the default sample service, and we can run that now, and we can see that everything's still going to run, everything's still wired up. The messages are still going to be delivered to the home, the about, the contact page. So everything's still working as expected. We just added a little bit of kind of special secret sauce with the interface and the default constructor. So next we want to look at maybe I'm a line of business app developer, mostly web apps. So a lot of what we utilize is maybe separate applications, maybe separate teams working on different pieces of the applications. Maybe our team doesn't have access to maybe a database layer, or somebody else is managing that for us. So we want to make sure that we can use more in-tiered architecture and kind of interact with those different projects as well. So we can see with our 4-man dependency injection, we still have our interface, we still have our default constructor, but now we have a repository. So the repository in our example here is just dealing with what would be essentially a database layer for our test, for our example purpose here. So same thing with this, we've got another instance of our 4-man dependency injection is going to pass in a repository, which is an iRepository or a new concrete implementation of repository. So this is just kind of mimicking a database call and demonstrating that you can do multiple layers with this approach as well. So it's going to go all the way in, and we see that our message has changed a little bit here, so we can still run this and make sure that we are in fact returning all the way back into the repository and getting that message delivered all the way back through the repository, through the service, back to the controller, and eventually into the view here. See, our message here is our new ID1 called, but we've got a little bit of business logic in our service, which will take the message returned from the repository and concatenate it with our original message. Does that make sense? Everybody kind of with me now? So it's kind of a contrived example, but just showing you that we can do multiple layers, multiple tiers in our application with a 4-man dependency injection. If you spend any time kind of going around the internet and looking up best practices and things and seeing what other people are using or utilizing, or if you've come across a application that you're maybe not familiar with, or you get an opportunity to work on something a little bit different, you may come across any number of dependency injection frameworks. There's a ton of them out there. There was an article that I read a couple of years ago that kind of listed 5 or 10 of the big most utilized dependency injection frameworks and kind of ran a speed test for all of those. And at the time we were using Unity, then we migrated over to Ninject, and then finally over to Autofac, which was the most recent one that it was working with, that was actually the fastest one in that particular article that I was reading. But what I'm working with currently in my current position is Unity, so we'll take a look at Unity injection framework. So Unity, since was a Microsoft project, and has actually been split out from the Microsoft team, and so now it's been moved out and managed through GitHub, through a third-party organization. So they're maintaining it. You can do pull requests, you can make changes, you can update as you see fit, and pull and get all the latest and greatest. There's plenty of information out on the web somewhere, not there apparently. But there's an overview, there's some getting started documentation that's actually pretty good in the Unity container, I believe. So essentially what Unity does is wire up into the lifecycle of the request, and it'll take your interfaces and your concrete implementations, and if you tell Unity about them in a number of different ways, they've got a couple of different ways that you can wire everything up. Then it'll take that request and it'll see that there's not a default constructor, there's not an empty constructor, something like that. There's an interface that knows that you need this concrete implementation to pass that in. So it'll handle that for you. So we've actually removed our empty constructor with the weirdness of the default concrete implementation. Now we just have our iSample service, our interface, to pass that in. We still have our field level service that we are using throughout the actions of the controller, but we don't have any of the weirdness of that default constructor. A lot of this I've just gone in and pulled the packages straight off NuGet. Everybody familiar with NuGet? Anyone not? If you get a chance, go out and check out NuGet. There's all kinds of tools available to download and play with and really make your life a lot easier. So the main two packages that are used for this particular example are Unity and Unity MVC. What that will do is bring in two different DLLs and create a new file for you that will handle all of the, or two new files, excuse me, that will handle all of the wiring up of the magic. The Unity config is where you will register your types. So where you will essentially tell Unity that if you see the interface for iSample service in a constructor, then we need to substitute the concrete implementation of a sample service. Same thing for an iRepository of type string. We need the concrete repository of string. There's a couple of different ways that you can actually register a lot of this stuff through Unity. You can do XML files and property files. That's kind of a little bit beyond the scope of this particular talk, but there are some other ways that you can use Unity. There's other ways that you can wire up. This is a really good way to get started. So you see that we no longer have our core main implementation of dependency injection here. Same thing at the service level. We just have our field of iRepository with our constructor injection here for iRepository.
Is Unity that NFC
Yeah, so let's take a little more look at this.
This is like a big mystery sandwich.
Yeah, so with the Unity MVC activator, what happens here is, and actually in the packages, when you bring in Unity MVC, and actually if you go to NuGet, all you really need to do is install Unity MVC. That will bring in its dependencies of Unity and Web Activator X, EX. So what that will do is when your application starts up, for Web Activator, we'll call the pre-application startup method and call up the Unity Web Activator. And what that will do is put it inside the lifecycle of that request. So when a request comes in, it'll look at, and this is the other important piece here, is the dependency resolver. So this is actually in the MVC system web MVC namespace. So anytime a controller is requested, or anytime a controller is newed up, this dependency resolver will fire any of the dependencies that have been wired up in it and intercept that request, and we'll come down in our config and see what's actually been registered. And if it calls into the home controller and sees that it needs a sample service, it'll new up a concrete implementation of the sample service, any of its dependencies. Since the sample service has a dependency on the iRepository interface, it'll do that up as well and kind of deliver all that back through.
So that's the dependency resolution.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, Unity itself doesn't really have anything to do with MVC or lifecycle.
Right.
What we're talking about is another interceptor that we put in there so that we can marry the lifecycle with the resolution.
Yeah, and that's sorry, I kind of glossed over that. Unity itself is the core that's going to handle a lot of the registrations. Unity MVC is a separate package, which is why it's in a separate namespace and a separate install. You can install Unity and not use Unity MVC. You can use Unity Web API if you're using Web API. You can use you can just register it yourself and new it up for like console applications or Windows services or something like that. So Unity MVC is what's doing the magic specific to MVC to wire up all the controllers. Unity itself is where you would register things for IOC.
So kind of answers the question. One, I think the answer would be that Unity provides a resolver. So you say, I want an object, it gives you the object, and it knows how to get the object because of the registration.
Yeah, exactly.
So expanding on that just a little bit, based on the example that you have here, when the application starts up, your interface always has a dependency resolved to one concrete implementation. Does Unity provide a scenario where I can have multiple different concrete implementations based on different scenarios?
It does, and there's a number of different scenarios that you can set registrations. You can set named registrations. So if you know for different concrete implementations, if you want to pass them in differently at different times based on a named registration for the same interface, you can do that as well.
Okay.
So that's a little bit more advanced, and,
Yeah, that's right.
and you know I'd be happy to go into that a little bit more as well.
Okay.
But yeah, there's all kinds of things you can set different lifecycle managements. So you can essentially create a singleton for things. If you needed a singleton for something, you can create per request registrations. There's a lot of additional complexity that actually helps deliver a more full-featured application. So if we run that, then we see that with Unity,
This is similar to Angular, where you send services, implementation services, you do dependency injection.
yeah, Angular has its own dependency injection. Yeah, absolutely.
Do the same kind of thing.
Yeah, and we see that
This is the implementation. Sequence.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
and you see that our pages are still working, delivering back the appropriate messages, calling all the way from the controller back into the service, all the way to the repository and back to the people. So Unity kind of stalled for a number of years under Microsoft. They developed their application, they developed their IOC container, and really didn't put a lot more effort into it, which I think is why they've kind of they released a couple of new versions, and then they finally just released it over to this third-party that's now managing that. So with the latest releases, they've really come a long way. The other ways to register services and things within the container provide a little bit more flexibility and seem to actually have increased some of the performance or improved some of the performance issues that they had with their early releases. So certainly wouldn't discount it if you come across it, or if you want to use it, then certainly feel free. If you come across it in the wild or within your company or something like that, look into it, read up on it, and see if you can really kind of work to improve performance and work to utilize a lot of the additional functionality that's provided. So the next one would be Ninject, and I like them because they have a nice little logo and a pretty little ninja guy, and their website hasn't been updated in quite some time. They've got some good examples and some pretty good documentation. It's a little difficult to navigate, so I usually go to Google and search the Ninject.org site through Google if I'm looking for a particular example. But with a lot of these dependency injection frameworks, once you get it up and running, unless you're doing something out of the ordinary, you can get away with configuring it once and just kind of forgetting about it. If you really wanted to work with it, you can certainly learn to utilize things a little bit more and really use the additional features that go kind of beyond just basic dependency injection. So we'll move on to Ninject. So for Ninject, the magic install was the Ninject MVC5 package, which will bring in the additional packages that it needs, which would be Ninject Web Common, Web Common Host, and Ninject itself. Again, if you could potentially get away with just bringing in just the Ninject package, but you'll have to do a lot of the wiring up yourself. You'll have to create your own dependency resolver to wire into the life cycle of your controllers for MVC, for example. Ninject does not bring in an additional file to handle the registration for you, so I had to essentially take our Unity Web Common file, create a Ninject Web Common file, and essentially do the same thing. Wire up a bootstrapper, register our modules, or one per request, and the Ninject module, create our kernel, and then bind to our services. So we see iSample service to sample service. Syntax is a little bit different. Again, that's, I think, maybe even on the first page of Ninject.org. Same thing for IRPOS. And then don't forget to set your dependency resolver at 11:30 at night before you get the demonstration, because it'll keep you up, as you will have wondered why it worked earlier in the day after you delete that message. After you delete this line, it won't work. So essentially, same thing. We'll open our controller. We see that we've still got our field level service, our home controller that accepts an iSample service. iSample service is still accepting an iRepository and wired up and everything. Will eventually work. Yep. So you see that we're still delivering everything. Not a lot of differences other than a few minor differences in our syntax and how to register things. Ninject actually doesn't have a lot of the additional functionality that Unity has. Unity has some additional ILC functionality, as well as some aspect-oriented functionality associated with it as well. But for a simple, lightweight dependency injection framework, I really enjoyed Ninject. And until recently, it was kind of my go-to. Any more questions about Ninject before we move on to one more dependency injection framework? No, moving kind of fast. Just wanted to make sure we covered all three of these, and then we'll kind of move on from there.
Why would you choose Ninject over Unity?
Unity is a little bit, in my experience, is a little bit more heavyweight, and if you're not using the additional functionality that a heavier project like Unity delivers, then my preference would be for a smaller, lightweight framework, which will essentially, in theory, boost performance, and you will have to load up a lot of monolithic issues. Yeah.
Changing on what you said earlier, there was a time when Unity was really lagging, where people who had been excited about Unity were getting really depressed because it wasn't being updated. There were other things, we want this, Well, we're not updating it. I don't know if you Microsoft MVP, that was, well, this is crap. I'm not a Microsoft employee. And so other dependency injectors came onto the market, and that personally, I believe, came into existence because Unity had turned into a piece of stagnant crap. That's no longer true about Unity. So, but a lot of people have invested in that injection, it's working for you, why go away from it? So that's some of the whys. And so a lot of times, if you look at which one's being used, you can get a good feel for the time of what was created.
Okay.
Yeah, or you might get a feel for any kind of bias or corporate issues. Maybe larger companies might feel more comfortable with a Microsoft-backed product like Unity was and still sort of is. So I've actually worked at a couple of different places where, oh, you want to use an injection framework? Okay, great. Unity. We're using Unity because it's a Microsoft thing. We're dealing with business critical things. I'm like, yeah, but we're not talking about rocket science here. It's dependency injection. We need just the bare minimum thing. No, sorry, corporate rules says Unity. Okay. I've been in places where corporate says Unity 2. Older versions of Unity. Okay, great. So it's if you've got your own preferences, if you've got kind of your own responsibility to determine which ones to use, you might want to weigh the pros and cons. You might try to look into the future and see what you're going to need. If you're more concerned about speed or lightweight, maybe you want Ninject or Autofac or even rolling your own. Clayton's rolled his own. He's just itching to put it into production somewhere. It's really kind of weighing the factors to choose your own destiny, so to speak. All right, so about a year and a half ago or so, I was back in Kentucky. We just moved down here a couple of months ago, but a year and a half ago or so, back in Kentucky, I was lead developer for a small company. We were hiring, so I was interviewing a number of candidates for an open position. One of them came in and told me, we talked about dependency injection and our pros and cons and our likes and dislikes, and he said, oh, I used to use Ninject, but I moved on to Autofac. Oh, that's interesting. So we got talking about it, and we pulled up the article that I mentioned previously that was kind of doing the shootout for the fastest dependency injection framework, and at the time Autofac was indeed the fastest. So with the application that I was working on at the time, we had written things with proper architectures and trying to decouple things where we could. So a day or two after that particular interview, candidate left. I kept thinking about it a day or two later. Sat down during lunch, took about an hour, and swapped out Ninject for Autofac for one of our client applications just because I could. No issues to speak of. The only issue was just in our wiring up the particular dependency resolver, and that's pretty much it.
So is that something you'd feel comfortable with, just swapping out like that, or was that just a really small application?
It was a large, small, or a small, medium project. But I was intimately familiar with all aspects of the project. So I was comfortable doing it because I knew there weren't any gotchas in the application architecture. I knew that if this particular area of the application worked, the entire thing was going to work. We had great code coverage for unit tests, so it was I could swap in, make sure that the application ran. I could hit F5, go through it. I could run all my unit tests. I was seeing that everything was working as expected. I was running all my functional tests. Everything was working. So no issues.
So just minimal risk.
Minimal for that particular role, yeah. If you're familiar with the architecture, if you're confident and comfortable with the rest of your team and that they're following good practices and following the standards that you put in place, I would feel pretty comfortable with it. If you're dealing with large, separate teams that may or may not be following the same standards, maybe they've got their own good standards for their own reasons, and you've got your own good standards for your own reasons, and maybe they don't so much mesh, then there may be a little bit more risk as well. If you find yourself working for a company that doesn't maybe follow some of their own best practices, then there's a little bit more issues as well. So just something to keep in mind. So the magic here for Autofac is back in the A's. Autofac MVC 5. And if I remember correctly, going into NuGet, searching for Autofac and MVC, came up with a different package altogether that had absolutely nothing to do with it. So it made sure it was Autofac.MVC5, and the proper version came up. I do not remember if it created its own webcom. I don't think it created its own webcom. Oh, yeah. Ninject did create its own webcom, and Unity created its 2 files. It was Autofac that did not. So Autofac was the one where I had to come in, create my own, register my repository and services with a little bit different syntax still. So everything's still just a little bit different. Set your resolver to the Autofac Dependency resolver, and then pass it into the MVC's resolver. The one difference here is that I don't have the auto wire up magic at the top of the page that we saw on the other. So I had to go in and modify the global ASAX to call the Autofac web common register dependencies. Okay. So it just goes back into our builder. Autofac site has a really good, quick getting started documentation as well. So that was pretty easy on getting everything up and running. They do have, we'll look at something a little bit different here in a second. They're just going through and checking the names of things and trying to automatically register. There's certain conventions that some of these follow that are a little bit different. I don't really like to directly interact with third-party conventions. I like to kind of abstract that away so that if we had a need to switch from Ninject to Autofac, then I don't have to worry about, oh, Ninject likes to do things in scenario A, whereas Autofac likes to do it in scenario B. If you abstract that away, you just have to worry about just a little minor change in a language-specific or a third-party specific file. Then I'll kind of manage that risk for you as well. So again, here's our magic, is where the dependencies are registered. Really nothing different with our controller. Still the same ISample service passed into the constructor of the home controller. all the way back into the sample service, takes our repository, and then our repository back in delivering our pretend database hit to return the particular message based on that.
So all three, the only thing that's changed is IOC.
Yeah, and just the dependent logic of wiring that up. That's pretty much it. There's of course their own additional functionality that tie in different things as well. We're using a lot of the aspect-oriented stuff for intercepting calls and doing some logging and things like that. We're currently using an older version of Unity doing a lot of that for us as well. I've got a couple of different proof of concepts using a couple of different dependency injection frameworks and trying out some of that additional functionality. But a lot of these, straight out of the box will get you a lot of functionality that you can worry about more of your business rules and implementing the things that the business folks are telling you that are the most important features to your customers. Any questions so far? All right. Everybody still awake? Got plenty of chicken in the back. All right. So far, we're all just it's all just file new project, web MVC projects out of the box with our dependency injection frameworks. Not separation of concerns with our different projects. In a particular solution, you might want to remove, pull your services out into a different project. You want to pull your repository out and do a different project, something like that. So this is just a quick down and dirty example of all these have been. But we're kind of going to move on to still that same everything inside the one project, but maybe separate things out a little bit better. Still using Autofac for this one. But for this, I went with what I typically do is I'll create just my own attribute. A lot of these dependency injection frameworks, you can decorate your classes. You can wire in their specific implementations of how do you say that an iSample service is a sample service. You can, with Unity, like I said earlier, you can use XML files, you can use any kind of different thing. With the application that I was talking about where we switched from Ninject to Autofac, we were already using just a generic attribute decorated on our services. So anybody familiar with decorating classes with attributes, using custom attributes? So essentially what I've done here is just created my own attribute and decorated my service with whatever dependency injection framework I'm using. I want to say, when you see this interface, I want to substitute this concrete class. That's all this particular attribute does. So with our Autofac thing, instead of directly saying binding iService to sample service, I just walk through the project or walk through the solution for all the references with a little bit of magic, check the name and check the inject attribute, that it has an inject attribute, and wire that up.
What is the advantage of this over anything else?
For my team back in Kentucky, we were finding that it was just a really easy way. If you're creating a new service, decorate it with an attribute. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about modifying an XML file to bind your interface to your concrete implementation. You don't have to worry about modifying your web common, your startup routine to do the binding for you. Whenever your application starts up, it's going to walk through there, create all your bindings for you, and register them and go.
So I assume it does that at like application startup.
It does an application startup. So you're going to get a tiny bit of performance hit at startup, but you know, for us at least, we were finding that it was minimal and it was worth it.
Yeah, but wouldn't you give up a lot of the advantages? For example, in each different test of my test cases, I want to have different concrete classes.
Sure.
I want to do runtime determination. You know, it becomes. I've done the same thing that way.
Sure.
I'm talking from my own experience.
Yeah.
You find out that right now today we have simple service is the only implementation of iService, but later on I now have 3 implementations.
Right.
Somehow you have to put the decision making in there. How does this handle when there are other? So I think there's a lot of trade-offs rather than value one way or the other. I think the situation.
Absolutely.
But the real question is, why was the setter public on your attribute? Because I was just looking at, wow, I actually could do a piece of code with that.
Sure.
Sorry.
No problem.
Actually, to his point, wouldn't your testing application determine whether you use attributes or not?
Yeah, and actually, let's look at some of this. So it really depends on how and when and where and what you're testing. So for this, we've got just a couple of quick down and dirty tests using mock. Anybody familiar with mock? M-O-Q, M-O-C-K, so just for quick unit tests, creating a mock service and passing in the mock service with the setup. You can see that on the screen. So anytime the service is called with get message, it'll return this first. You'll pass in your mock object, and then you'll be testing just the results of the call to the index view. So you're not testing your service at that point, you're not testing your repository at that point, you're just testing that when you call the index action on the home controller, that it will return, that it will call the thing you wanted it to call one time only, that the result is not null, and that the message it delivered back was the one that we told it it would deliver back. So you're not testing your service at that point, you're only testing the results of your controller.
Never used it. Actually encode each one of these units as simple. Or a little break kind of like a framework. I've never done it.
Well, if you're doing TDD, which was our topic last month, then you're going to be writing your test before you're writing your production
I
code.
don't know if that's. Is there a tool or something that you can plan the page and kind of create?
Tools exist, they're usually evil. I market, in full disclosure, I market a tool. Tools exist, they are usually evil.
Yeah, I'm sure there are a number of tools that would do something that like you're describing.
Yeah, I'm asking for something that makes use. Does anybody know?
That was just painful decision.
I mean, this looks completely annoying. The way it's sitting there,
So it's failing.
this for every single page that I have.
It makes you think about the code though, it really works out better than it works out. It's hard to transition, but it really does. Because you're thinking,
So are you talking about something that would set up these mocks for you, like Automock? There is a library for Automock that is called Automock that will set up the whole binding.
What am I planning is asking?
Yeah. So at best, to the evil comment, at best, you're going to prove that your code does what your code does. Then it's going to be your job to go in to prove that the test that says that your code does what it does is in fact doing the right thing. So testing after the fact is far more difficult because you're really only going to be able to test that it's doing the thing that you originally intended it to do.
So the application flows. This tests that the application flows. This is not testing, absolutely not testing the underlying object. It's supposed to be we want to test that side, which is fine.
And I think maybe another piece of something that may be a little less painful is if there's some mock if you need set up that's consistent, you can have some helper that gives that or factory.
Yeah.
That.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Yeah,
if you have
with
some logging code, you don't want to have to write this kind of thing for the logging code for every single you can run on unit test. You can have something that does it.
Yeah.
Right.
Clayton and I actually worked together on a medium-sized project using his. Sorry, go ahead.
Back to your attribute, you have to get the thing that lets you mapping.
It helps the mapping. So the mapping is done in this loop essentially.
So if you were to change out the map, let's say you change out the concrete, lots of direction interjecting, you just have to change the
You wouldn't have to change it. You would only change it. You would either remove this attribute or add a new one.
switching from Unity to Ninject or Autofac. Then if you go back,
Yeah. So you would.
that one line in the for each is the only part you have to change. Well, unless you're keeping the filter. Well, you want to change the concrete level. Okay, yeah, then you would change that. Move it off one thing, put it.
Yeah.
Okay, how does that do with concrete? That's what I was asking.
It's the concrete class that is decorated.
What if you have more than one concrete class decorated, then the cost of each will be.
For Autofac and Unity, it's whatever the last one that was registered. I've actually extended my attribute as well, depending on the need. For Unity, using named bindings, so you can add additional properties to the attribute, create an optional name, something like that. So if you wanted to reference for this, maybe for home controller you wanted to use sample 2, then you would just utilize the sample 2
So all you got to do
registration.
is mark the class file, so the class file you want, and the framework is how.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
This Autofy, if I heard the gentleman in the back correctly, it will work with any of the 3 IOC frameworks. You just have to change your reference, right?
The attribute would, yeah.
Okay.
All you would have to do is maybe, so this one is a specific Autofac web comment. So you would create a Ninject one that was, whatever the specific format for registering for Ninject, you would just change that particular thing, do the same loop over.
So by using attributes, we're not stuck to one framework.
Right.
Okay.
But this again would be kind of the simple out of the box get you going quickly thing. You wouldn't start with the additional complexity of the name bindings or the lifecycle management or something like that. You would add those as the application evolved, as the requirements changed, and got a little bit more needy as they may be. So we see that just with the attribute and quick little registration, everything should take forever to start. Work as expected. And all pages loaded with our messages. And again, and with all these, this would get you, 95, 99% of your registrations up and running. Then if you did have special one-off cases, or if you had, a need to swap in and out, you can always go in and add a registration to your container or change of registration after the fact. So I can still come in here after register items has been called, change the binding for iSample service to sample service to iSample service to sample service 2, for instance. Being the second one in, it would be the winner.
So even if you had a whole service that didn't have attributes decorated, you would just manually bind them.
Yeah,
there.
I could still come in here and do the binding here and add it, and that would be added as well. So that would not preclude you from going in and making the necessary changes. You could add some additional logic. You could add some kind of, yeah, you could utilize the additional functionality in whatever IOC container that you're using, dependency injection container that you're using, and wire that out as well. So that would prevent you from doing that as well. Any more questions? All right, so that actually does it for the code. And so this is what we looked at. For our first example, it was just a file new project. Example 2 was new it up every time you needed it. Example 3 was just the field level service, new it up in the default constructor. 4 was 4-man's dependency injection. 5 was 4-man with multiple layers from the service all the way up through the repository. 6, 7, and 8 were Unity, Ninject, and Autofac, and then 9 was putting it all together. So again, quick and easy. Still lots of additional functionality with all 3 of them, and additional functionality with the other dependency injection frameworks as well. There's a little bit dependency injection versus IOC. Inversion of controls. Everyone familiar with inversion of control? So it's kind of removing the dependency from A to B and reversing it to B to A. So it's kind of reversing that dependency through your application so that you can kind of plug and play as you need. So it's a little bit better separation of concerns. So that's kind of a broader topic. So this is more just direct dependency injection. So with that, if there are no more questions, that's all I got for you. We can stick around and continue talking about more specific to Unity, Ninject, or Autofac, or even going into broader topics of IOC. Clayton will be handing out some raffle tickets. We've got 2 30-day memberships to Pluralsight and 1 JetBrains license for you. All right, so thank you very much. We will be back next month, first Tuesday of the month, every month. No, go ahead.
Oh, right.
So first Tuesday of the month, every month, here at 7 o'clock. We're always looking for speakers. If anyone's willing to speak, we'd love to have you. We're looking for additional topics, and we're looking for additional sponsors. So if you know anybody that wants to give us free stuff to raffle away, or give us any fun, exciting software, or anything like that, we'd love to have it. So if you've got any feedback for us, we'd love to hear that as well. We will continue to send out emails, not too often to bombard you with things, but do follow us on Twitter. We do have a Twitter account now. It's stpete.net, spelled out. And with that, thank you all for coming.
Will the code be available?
Yeah, I'll try to get the code up in the next couple of days, as well as the slide deck, so if anyone wants that.
No, I mean, where?
I'll put it in the comment section of the meetup site. Yeah. And the slide deck will have links to the wiki definition, Mark Fowler definition, links to Unity, Ninject, Autofac, and awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
So I think about right now. So right now, this.